Oh, hey everyone, it's Austin, back again with another band devotional. Housekeeping stuff, just if you're watching, please go check out the forums below if you're interested in any of them. There's 4 different types. There's the prayer box or Thanksgiving box, sign up for devotionals, feedback, and prayer team signups. Haven't had anyone contact me about anything. So if you'd like to do that, that'd be awesome. But here we go. So that was one. We're going to keep diving into spiritual warfare. And I actually bought this book called Spiritual Warfare and the Storyline of Scripture. And it is amazing. It is opening up my eyes, and I've only read 13 pages of it. But it's just going to go through the Bible, book by book, and talk about where spiritual warfare was evident. And so we are going to start at the beginning, right at Genesis. And so I'm going to read the fall, and then we'll pick it apart quickly and see where the spiritual warfare was evident and how that can be applied to our lives, and then we'll have some practical applications at the end. So, we interrupt this message to bring you the message. The audio was funky the first time. In reality, I just tumbled over my own words a lot, so I'm recording this after I edited most of it. But here is the verse. Again, Genesis 3. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat any tree in the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.'" Pause. It's a lot of words. But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, that rhymed, she took of its fruit and ate, and she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then both of their eyes were opened, and they knew they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. So that just really is one of the earliest examples of Satan getting in the way and wedging his way into the cracks of someone's doubts and taking over. And so let's dive in. So spiritual warfare, I defined it last week, but this book had a couple different definitions that I thought were really interesting. And this is the one that this book is based off of. Spiritual warfare is a multi-level conflict between good and evil, initiated on the supernatural plane with the prehistoric rebellion of Lucifer, and transferred onto the natural plane with the fall of man. Satan, man's adversary, continues to deceive and divert people from finding salvation in Jesus Christ, and to harass and hinder Christians through enticement to sin and exploitation of weakness. Because Satan is the author and initiator of original sin, and because he is the god of this world, spiritual warfare involves and God of this world is in quotes because God is God of this world. Spiritual warfare involves a constant multidimensional battle against the world, the flesh, and the devil. Warfare implies the likelihood of losses, eternal separation from God for the non-believer, and diminished effectiveness and suffering for the believer. So this is evident right away. In the beginning, Satan is talking to Eve, and he is depicted as a serpent, which is a very cunning, smart animal, and he can sense the doubt in her about the tree. He senses her lack of foundation, and in this book it describes that she starts to minimize, like very smallly minimize what God has said about the tree. For example, Eve did not hesitate to reply to the serpent's challenge of God's words. While she repeated what God had said in a general way, her response reveals three important differences from what God said. First, she minimized God's generosity. God said, "You may freely eat," but the woman said, "We may eat." Secondly, she added to God's prohibition the thought that they must not touch it. Third, she weakened slightly the certainty of God's punishment if they ate the fruit. God said that if they ate from the tree, they would certainly die, but Eve only said, "Lest you die." While the changes to what God said seem insignificant, they reveal something about Eve's failure to take seriously God's words on them. And that's really reflected in our lives when we have a small doubt, insecurity, just something is off, no matter how small it is, because some of you may have heard me read that and be like, that's almost nothing. But Satan sensed that, and he sees that, and he twisted it. And he said, "You will surely not die." He's taking what Eve already has in her brain and twisting that doubt into something more. And he's tempting her to eat it because he knows it's for evil. And again, that's just reflected so clearly in our lives. If we have a lack of foundation in Scripture, in prayer, in anything, we tend to have more doubts and fears about what God has said, and then he takes like, "Oh, that's not so bad. That's not as bad as you think. God wouldn't be mad at me." And this apple, which seemed like an ordinary apple to Eve, besides the fact that God had said, "Don't touch it," Satan had twisted and said, "Oh, it's just an apple that will let you know more and see more." And ultimately it led to the detriment of them. And again, like I keep saying it, but that's reflected in our lives. How often does something just look so innocent and so like, oh, on the surface it's fine, and you can feel a voice in your head saying, "Don't mess with it, don't touch it, don't eat the apple," and you're like, "Nah, it's just an apple, nothing bad will happen." And you take a bite of it and you fall down a path, and that's because Satan has just twisted it in your mind and sensed it and attacked in a spot where he knows you are weak. And we're weak, and I am weak, and I'm not felt like I was specifically calling you out, but we all struggle with this. And so the question for us is, what is our apple? How do we discern what our own apples are in our lives? For some of us, it's just distractions. It's me, oh, I want to play Xbox, but what else could I be doing with my time? Could I be reading the Bible more? Did I plan to read the Bible that day and go practice music, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I can take a break now? Is it a relationship that looks good on the surface, but something in you's like, don't make that friendship, don't ask her out? Like, we just have to learn to listen. And practically, I'll switch to that now, that just comes from having such a solid foundation in all the areas that I mentioned last week, and I'm going to keep going over, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, and we're going to get tired of it. But having that solid foundation of reading the truth and being in His Word, of praying every day, of spending time in a secret place, just you and God, and just having conversations in that relationship will make it easier to discern what's good and what's evil. Because Satan doesn't just come full on and attack, he's cunning. He knows how to get to you smartly. I'm going to read this section. This passage highlights several matters about spiritual warfare that are repeated throughout the Bible. First, Satan came disguised as a serpent. Paul warned the Corinthian church that Satan often comes in camouflage, even as an angel of light, 2 Corinthians 11:14. Jesus compared false prophets to ravaging wolves in sheep's clothing, that was Matthew 7:15. Satan seldom appears like a lion seeking to devour, 1 Peter 5:8. Though that still describes him, he's cunning like a serpent, and he often uses false teachings and heresy to try and wedge their way in your life. And that's another thing, like, the scary part about pastors today is they know how to twist the Bible to what they're trying to communicate for personally, and a lot of them have good intentions, and some of them don't. Some of them want money, and it's pretty easy to see, but not every time is it easy to see. And that's why you personally have to be rooted in this yourself, so you can discern what you agree with, what you don't agree with, because at what point are you treating what the pastor teaches on as complete truth when you don't know? And that was another little rant that we can get into another time, but mainly all I'm saying is we have to have this personal foundation. I just pray for this campus. We're hurting, and now more than ever will be easy for Satan to try and attack and wedge his way into things. And I pray that you just help us put on your full armor to defend against those attacks. Amen. Thank you.